Hello and welcome back to Race Recap. My name is Jackson. Sorry it took a little while, but last weekend we had the IMSA drivers take to the track in their second of 4 endurance races of the year in a 12-hour event at Sebring in Florida. So this is an endurance race, I mentioned, second of 4. There was the Rolex 24, which had about 4 to 3 drivers in the car. This past weekend where we had 3 drivers in each car, and then we'll have the championship race in Le Mans, and a few months before that, 6 hours at Watkins Glen. Now, endurance races are special. It's like a bonus cup inside of the overall championship. So a lot of the drivers that we'll see in this race today, and we saw in the Rolex 24, will not be competing full-time. They're just going for this 4-race crown, the Endurance Cup Championship. Now, with that in mind, let's get into the recap. It was a 12-hour race, so you can expect a little bit of excitement. So there was early on, there was no caution when the 8 John Ferrano LMP2 car spun around, and it was crazy at the start. The Rolex 24 winners in Gtd, Zachary Robichon's team in the 16 car, Porsche, he had issues early on and went behind the wall. So did the 01 Cadillac of Sebastian Bourdais and the 36 LMP3 Andretti Autosports car. They had engine problems. So then there was no caution when the 74, another LMP3 car, Gar Robinson spun around, who won actually at Rolex 24. Then there was no caution when again LMP3, the 13 of Ori Findani spun out. Then once again, there was no caution when Ori Findani nosed it actually into the tire wall. Luckily, he was able to back out before a full course caution came on. And then another LMP3 car issue. This time it was Lance Wilsey who spun out. Dennis Anderson was no caution when he spun in the LMP2 car. The first GTD car to spun out was Roberto Lacorte in the 47. Then there was no caution when Don Yount spun around in a GTD car. Another LMP3 car with an issue. This time it was James Vance who went around. The first full course caution was a pretty big accident. It happened when the LMP3 car, number 6 of Alex Udell, was coming off into turn number 1, and there was a Cadillac exiting pit road that might have caught his attention away from the track for a moment, and he spun out right into the path of legendary driver Juan Pablo Montoya, who was in the LMP2 81. His car actually won an LMP2 at Daytona. He made heavy contact with the back end of Udell's car, and then slid up into the side of the 1 GTD of Eric Johansson. And then the second full course caution happened right after that. It was when the 66 car of Kiffin Simpson, the rookie in GTD in the 66, he spun out and made some contact with the tire wall. And then there was no caution when Martino Lerne spun around. And then there was no caution when Dwight Merriman spun around in the 18 LMP2 entry. The third full course caution was for an LMP2 car. It spun out. It was Rio Pintre de Andrade. Then there was no caution when Gar Robinson spun out for the second time today in the LMP74. Then Jonathan Bomarito spun out in the LMP2 car. The fourth full course caution happened when Giorgante Serenghetto spun out in the 47. He actually hit the tire wall and knocked the tires out of place, which was the cause for the full course yellow. And then there was no caution when the LMP3 car of Harry Gottsacker spun out in the 6th. Then there was no caution when Dan Goldberg went around in the LMP3 car, both of those LMP3 cars. Then there was no caution when Andreas Fordback spun out in the LMP2 entry. The fifth full course caution was for debris on the front straightaway. A tire carcass actually came off. And then the sixth full course caution was once again for Harry Gottsacker in the LMP car, number 6 actually. He went straight off and hit hard into the tire wall. And there was no caution when last year's GTD, contending champs and contending for the win here today in GTD, the 96 crew of Bill Auberlin in the car at that time, he spun out. And then the seventh full course caution and final full course caution of the race was when the 54 of John Bennett stopped on track in the LMP3 car. Then there was no caution when Anthony Mantella spun out in the LMP3 car. The first Gtd Pro accident happened when the Acura, the 93 of Ashton Harrison Henry, spun out in the 93. And then the first DPI accident happened shortly after that when the 31 defending champ car, this time it was driven by Mike Conway, spun out. Then there was no caution when the 44 of Andy Lally spun out in the Aston Martin GTD. Then the 31 spun around again. There was no caution, but it was driven by Pippo Durrani this time. And then there was no caution when Kuno Whitmer spun around in the 13. And lastly, it was a crazy finish to the race. Earl Bamber's crew, along with Alex Wynn and Neil Janney in the 02 Cadillac, looked like they had the overall win sealed, but they got a penalty on the last pit stop sequence, so they had to fight their way back. And just as there was 1 hour left in the race, he passed the 5 Cadillac of Richard Westbrook for the lead of the race. But right after he did that, he clipped one of the lap cars and spun himself around in the 02 car. But he was able to continue and rebound for the win. So the checkers went to the 02 of Earl Bamber, Alex Lynn, and Neil Janney in DPI. Meanwhile, over in the LMP2 class, it was Ben Keating, Mikkel Jensen, and Scott Huffaker who won it in the 52. Lance Wilsey, Joka Barbaso, and Mauti Jobekin won in LMP3. Once again, it was the 3 Corvette last year's champions. They got it done in GTD Pro. Antonio Garcia, Jordan Taylor, and Nikki Kasberg came along for this race. And then lastly in GTD, we saw him wreck a couple times. It was the 47 crew, Roberto Lacorto, Giorgi Sargento, and then Antonio Fusio, all won in GTD. Well, that's all for race recap. Come join us in about a little less than 3 weeks when the IMSA series takes to the track on the streets of Long Beach.